I remember her bare feet on his polished hardwood floor. It was the quiet sound of her toes pressing against someone else's living room that cut deeper than any shout or curse ever could. You might think the loudest betrayal is the sight of two people tangled in sheets or the taste of salt in your mouth when you realize you've been lied to. But for me, it was those silent, defenseless feet, her heels lifted slightly, her ankles tensing like she was ready to run yet didn't. I'd expected raised voices or slamming doors. I found only the hush of a stolen afternoon and the faint trace of her favorite perfume mingling with someone else's cologne. It was the moment my entire life skewed off balance like a gyroscope that lost its spin and just collapsed. And somehow, even now, that image of her skin against that unfamiliar floor haunts me more than the memory of her pressed against him. I didn't rush in. I stood there, half hidden by the doorframe, watching. My heart hammered so violently I half expected it to burst from my chest. The rest of my body felt iced over, a strange, dead calm that spread to the tips of my fingers. I couldn't even process what I was seeing at first, two silhouettes in the dying light from a wide glass window, the shape of her back curved toward him, the way his hand traced a line along her spine. She wore a cream-colored blouse, unbuttoned enough to reveal a hint of skin that should have been mine to see. And those bare feet planted on the floor as if she were trying to find steady ground in a place she had no right to be. I couldn't hear them talk, but I caught his voice in low, confident murmurs that seemed to reassure her. The same tone I might have used once when we were newlyweds and I wanted to make her feel safe. Then she answered him with something so soft, so intimate that I wanted to tear through the air and shout her name. But I couldn't move. It was like someone pinned me with invisible nails. My breathing turned shallow. I gripped the doorframe so tightly I heard the wood creak. For a second I thought I might pass out. But no, I remained awake, painfully awake, absorbing every second of this spectacle. She leaned into him, her arms sliding around his waist. He was taller than me, broader in the shoulders. I noticed everything as if my brain had turned hyper-aware, the subtle shifting of her hips, the point at which her blouse rose up, exposing a slim band of her lower back. This was no mere accident. She was here by choice, comfortable, familiar with him. She was letting him hold her. That was when something inside me fractured. My wife was letting another man cradle her in his arms. It wasn't even the raw sexuality of it, though that was there too, humming like a low guitar chord. It was the intimacy that scorched me, a closeness I recognized from better days in our marriage. A closeness she now gave him. I swallowed back bile. A swirl of memories came, spiked with acid. Our wedding day, her laughter echoing in the sunlit church courtyard, the first time our newborn son kicked in her belly, late-night takeout boxes strewn around our living room when we were too busy or too broke to cook. Suddenly, all those moments flickered like a slideshow. And the final image was her feet against that polished floor, in a condo that wasn't ours, in a life that had cut me out. I wish I could say I charged in and did something dramatic, punched him, yanked her away, demanded an explanation. But I stayed stuck for what felt like an eternity, a nauseated bystander in my own life. Then I stepped back, heart pounding, and walked out without making a sound. My vision blurred. I remember stumbling down the hallway outside his apartment, nearly colliding with a potted plant near the elevator. The walls seemed to stretch and ripple. My entire body shook. By the time I reached the street, my shirt clung to my skin with sweat. I got in my car and stared at the steering wheel, my breath ragged. I guess that's how my story of betrayal truly begins, with my wife's bare feet on another man's floor, the hush of that stolen moment, and me failing to break the silence. We'd been married for over a decade. Sometimes I think back and wonder if it really was so bad that she had to do this. Or maybe we just let ourselves drift, so lost in daily obligations that we forgot to ask how the other was truly feeling. For months I'd sensed a tension I couldn't name. We still lived under the same roof, but it was as though we occupied different emotional planets. I came home from work exhausted, wanting only to sleep. She busied herself with her laptop on the dining room table, finishing marketing campaigns or editing press releases for her clients. We barely spoke except to coordinate our son's schedule. And yet it never crossed my mind that she'd find comfort in someone else's arms. I remember a day, not too long before I discovered the affair, when our 8-year-old son, Ethan, told his teacher he had 2 dads. One's cool, he said, and the other buys groceries. He repeated that story later, all bright-eyed and innocent. His teacher laughed. I didn't. Something about those words stung me in a place I hadn't known was so raw. I tried to brush it off, but the resentment festered. I felt reduced to a paycheck, a caretaker of mundane needs. For years I'd poured myself into being a reliable husband, a present father, the man who made sure the house was in order. But in my son's eyes I was the dad with the grocery bags. Meanwhile, there was a cool dad out there, someone who took him to arcades or gave him rides in a fancy car. At the time, I had no idea that man was real. I thought Ethan was just daydreaming about some fictional hero. I was wrong. A few days after I learned the truth in that hallway, I confronted Rachel. It wasn't a screaming match, though maybe that would have been healthier. Instead, I let ice fill my voice. I only asked her once, how long? She stared at me from across the living room, her eyes swimming with guilt. A couple of months, she admitted. I didn't break anything. I didn't raise my hand. I just said, all right, and walked out. My body felt hollow. A piece of me wished I could just vanish. Then, in a bizarre twist, I went and bought a new kettle, one that took 30 minutes to boil. I needed something painfully slow and deliberate, something that matched the leaden pace of my own unraveling. I set it on the stove, lit the burner, and sat down to wait. I listened to the kettle hiss and sputter like an exorcism of all the rancor I'd swallowed over the years. She hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to speak or cry. I didn't give her a chance. The kettle and I stared each other down for half an hour until all the water evaporated and the metal shrieked from the heat. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed the hallway scene, the hush, the polished floor, the shape of her body leaning into someone else's chest. But something else surfaced too, a deeper ache from my childhood. It kept colliding with the new agony, intensifying it. I remembered a day I'd come home from grade school, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and found my own father packing his suitcase. He never said goodbye. He stepped out the door and never returned. That sense of abandonment, of worthless confusion, welled up inside me as I realized I might be on the brink of doing the same thing to Ethan. Or maybe I'd be on the receiving end. It was an eerie mirror I couldn't stand to look at. I'm not sure how I managed to work during that period. Maybe my job as an engineering designer gave me a mechanical refuge. I pinned my emotions behind a glass wall, focusing on product specs, deadlines, client meetings. Yet at night, I was a wreck, consumed by thoughts of her betrayal, visualizing her in that other man's arms, wondering if she found comfort, passion, or just escape. She seldom tried to talk to me. We navigated the house like strangers, me in the kitchen, her in the den, a tense silence in place of the banter we once shared. Then came the day I dropped Ethan off at school. On the way home, he was quiet. Usually, he'd babble about his favorite video game or a new trick he learned on the playground. That morning, he just stared out the window, clutching a caramel candy. I tried to ask if everything was okay. He shrugged. Finally, he said Mommy was with Uncle Dan yesterday. The words took a moment to register. Uncle Dan. So that was how they'd introduced him, someone cool like an uncle. I felt my chest tighten. Ethan turned and gave me a curious look as if searching for reassurance. But I had none. I dropped him off, telling him I loved him, and drove away, numb. That same afternoon, I made my decision. No more waiting, no more pretending. I told her, I'm going to see him. She stood in the kitchen, a dish towel in her hands, her eyes flickering with something between panic and resignation. Why? She asked. What do you hope to accomplish? I couldn't give her a clear answer. Maybe I wanted to look him in the eye, see what kind of man he was. Maybe I craved the confrontation, the rush of adrenaline, or the closure I thought might come from facing the one who took what was mine. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to show him I wasn't afraid. The next day, I drove downtown to his office building, a sleek, modern tower of tinted glass. Security guards with badges patrolled the lobby. A young receptionist greeted me with professional politeness. Everyone assumed I was just another business associate. I forced a smile, introduced myself. A coworker in a crisp suit led me down a hallway lined with white fluorescent lights. My stomach clenched. I could sense the tension building, a tight coil of anger and dread. When I saw Daniel H., the name etched in silver on an office door, my pulse hammered in my ears. I stepped into his large office, glass walls overlooking the city, polished black furniture, an imposing desk in the center. He was there, leaning against a filing cabinet, a phone pressed to his ear. I caught a glimpse of that confident stance, broad-shouldered, tall, with a commanding presence that screamed success. The moment he saw me, his entire posture changed. He froze. The quick flash of recognition in his eyes was accompanied by fear, like a dog that just realized it was caught stealing food from the table. He ended the call abruptly, cleared his throat. Michael, he said, as if my name tasted bitter on his tongue. I didn't shake his hand. I stood there, studying him. He wore an expensive suit, maybe $1,000 or more. His tie was perfectly knotted. Yet behind the polished veneer, I saw the cracks, the flicker in his gaze, the subtle twitch of his jaw, the tension in the way he gripped the edge of his desk. I placed a single document on the table. This isn't a threat, I said, my voice low. It's a transfer of property forms. Some things Rachel and I built together I've decided to reassign. I want everything in my name. My words hung in the air. It was a partial lie. I intended to finalize certain holdings so she couldn't drag me into a messy financial meltdown if things turned uglier. But part of me just wanted to watch him sweat. He stared at the document, then at me, confusion etched on his face. I didn't explain further. The tension in the room was thick. Outside, a phone rang at the receptionist's desk. Here, time seemed stuck. After a long pause, he asked, "Does Rachel know?" A hollow laugh escaped my throat. "She will," I answered. Then I turned and walked out, ignoring the stares of the employees nearby. As I made my way back to the elevator, I passed a row of cubicles. One of them had a framed photo of a golden retriever. Another displayed some motivational quote about success. The emptiness of corporate life, the facade of it all, hit me like a punch. I realized how easily we wrap ourselves in illusions, happy family photos on desks, pristine suits, nice smiles for clients, while behind the scenes, hearts are breaking, souls are corroding. I headed straight home. My mind buzzed. A part of me expected to feel triumphant, like I'd claimed some moral high ground by confronting him so calmly. But I felt emptier than ever. I pulled into the driveway and saw her car, parked askew like she'd rushed home. My pulse sped up, wondering if she'd guessed what I was up to. I stepped into the living room. She was on the couch, knees drawn up, arms hugging herself, her face pale. She looked at me with an unreadable expression. "What did you do?" she whispered. I sank into the armchair across from her, trying to slow my breathing. "I made arrangements," I said. "That's all." She blinked, and for a moment I saw tears brimming in her eyes, though she tried to hide them. "God, Michael," she said quietly. "We can't keep going like this." I gave a curt nod. "I know." My voice was tired. "I'm done trying." She exhaled shakily. "Where does that leave us?" I looked away, fixing my gaze on a patch of uneven paint on the wall. "I think it means I'm leaving," I said. A sudden wave of calm washed over me, a strange, dispassionate certainty, as if I'd rehearsed this line in my head for years. She sat up straighter, panic rushing into her face. "You're leaving me?" I almost laughed at the question. But the sound died in my throat. "I'm leaving all of this," I corrected. "The version of us we pretended to hold on to, it's gone." She opened her mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. We both knew it was the truth. Without another glance, I got up and headed to her bedroom. It still smelled of her vanilla lotion. The bed we once shared, the photos on the nightstand, everything felt so foreign now. I dragged a suitcase from the closet, methodically folding my clothes and stacking them inside. I left her things untouched. The softness of her sweaters, the shape of her heels, all of it carried faint memories I couldn't afford to dwell on. I zipped the suitcase and walked out, passing her in the living room without stopping. I couldn't meet her eyes. I remember stepping outside, the cool dusk air hitting my face. My hands trembled on the suitcase handle. In the distance, a neighbor's dog barked. A lawnmower hummed somewhere. Life went on for everyone else. For me, it felt like the final toll of a bell. My mind drifted to Ethan. What would this do to him? But I wasn't thinking straight enough to plan. I just knew I had to get out before I shattered completely in front of them both. I found a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and battered vending machines. The room had dull beige walls, threadbare curtains, and a stale odor of cigarettes. I sank onto the bed, exhaustion crashing over me. Yet sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her bare feet on that foreign floor, or the day I found out my father left me behind for a new life. The parallels gnawed at me. I thought if I die here, alone in a stained motel bed, maybe it won't matter. Maybe that would be simpler. It was a fleeting, desperate wish. I wasn't actively suicidal, but I was dangerously empty, like a man no longer tethered to any sense of purpose. Morning came. A crack of pale light slipped through the curtains. I forced myself up, showered under a barely lukewarm drizzle, and then headed to work because I didn't know what else to do. My boss eyed me with concern. I probably looked like a ghost. I threw myself into tasks, sketches, and prototypes. During my lunch break, I sat in my car instead of joining coworkers. I stared at the steering wheel, letting out a few ragged breaths. My phone buzzed with missed calls from Rachel. I ignored them. That day blurred into the next. I returned to the motel each night, the hush of the parking lot a grim reminder that I'd made my choice. After a few days, guilt began creeping in, especially about Ethan. I texted Rachel to ask if I could see him. She replied that he had a class project, but maybe next week. I recognized the underlying message. I wasn't welcome to just stroll back. The father inside me screamed to fix things, to protect my son from the worst fallout. But I'd severed my tie with Rachel so abruptly that the path felt blocked. Each day I hovered in that painful limbo until one evening I heard a knock on my motel door. I opened it to see my boy standing there, clutching a small backpack, tears in his eyes, and Rachel behind him. "Hey buddy," I said softly, stepping aside so they could enter. The look she gave me was filled with uneasy truce. She muttered something about not wanting to keep Ethan away, that it wasn't fair to him. I nodded. She set down a plastic bag with some of his clothes and a toothbrush. "I'll pick him up tomorrow," she added. Then she gave Ethan a quick hug and left. I stood there, my heart pounding as my own son stared at me in this dingy room. He sniffled. "Mom said you're staying here for a while," he murmured. "You and Mommy, are you fighting?" My chest tightened. It was a simple question, but the answer was tangled in heartbreak. "Yeah," I said finally, "we are. But it's not because of you, Ethan." He nodded, though I could tell he wasn't convinced. We sat down on the bed. He pulled out a handheld gaming device, fiddling with the buttons. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can tell me anything," I said. "I'm still your dad." He looked at me with wet eyes. "Mommy cries sometimes," he whispered. "She thinks I don't hear her, but I do. I don't want us to not be a family." His words sliced into me like a blade. I swallowed hard. "I know," I said. "I'm so sorry, kiddo." That night, Ethan fell asleep curled on the bed next to me, the flickering motel TV casting shadows on the wall. I stayed up, head pounding with regrets and confusion. A bitter voice inside me asked if this was truly better, me, exiled in a motel with my boy in tears, than confronting the betrayal head-on at home. But I knew I couldn't go back to living under the same roof with Rachel after what I'd seen. My father's departure had taught me that sometimes the wound only grows deeper if you linger. Yet here I was, inadvertently repeating some of the same mistakes. The cycle of pain felt unstoppable. The next morning, I took Ethan out for breakfast at a nearby diner. We picked a booth by the window. He was quiet, poking at his scrambled eggs. I tried to lighten the mood. "Remember when we used to have pancake eating contests?" I said. He nodded but didn't smile. "That was before," he trailed off, letting the weight of before hang unspoken. "Hey," I began, not sure what to say next. Then I recalled the day he told his teacher about having two dads. The memory stung. But maybe it was time to address it. "You said once you had two dads, remember?" He lifted his gaze, confusion etched on his face. "I don't remember." I forced a wry smile. "You said one was cool and one bought groceries." Ethan's cheeks reddened. "Oh, I didn't mean it," he muttered. I reached over and gently ruffled his hair. "I know," I said. "But can you tell me who you meant by the cool dad?" He hesitated, biting his lip. Finally, he sighed. "Mommy told me not to talk about it. But it was Dan. He took me to a game arcade once, said it'd be our little secret." My stomach churned. So that was how Daniel earned my son's loyalty, by playing the fun hero while I was stuck being the responsible adult at home. All that time I was clueless, letting someone else fill that role. The betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined. Ethan finished half his breakfast. I paid the bill, left a tip, and we walked outside into an overcast sky. I stared at the swirling clouds, feeling a knot of despair tighten in my gut. For the sake of my son, I had to keep it together. "Buddy," I said quietly, "you never need to keep secrets from me. Even if an adult tells you to. Promise?" He looked up at me and nodded, tears threatening to spill again. Then he hugged me, burying his face in my jacket. I felt the fragile trust between us, and for the first time in days I let myself cry silently, holding onto him in that dingy parking lot. Rachel picked him up later that day. She looked exhausted, her makeup doing a poor job of hiding puffy eyes. We didn't speak beyond the bare minimum. The moment she drove off, my shoulders slumped. I wanted to go back inside the motel and collapse. But a strange impulse pushed me to drive to the old house, the one I'd grown up in, on the far side of town. It sat in a rundown neighborhood, a place I hadn't visited in years. Maybe I was searching for clarity, or maybe punishing myself by confronting my ghosts. The house was still there, chipped paint and a sagging porch. A different family lived in it now. I stood on the sidewalk, gazing at the yard where I once played catch with my father before he packed his things and left. My mind was a swirl of half-formed thoughts. How easily do we walk away from our children? How quickly do we replace love with resentment? I wanted to scream at the ghosts that haunted these walls. But I just stood there in the drizzle. Then, with a sense of finality, I turned away and drove off. I continued in a daze until I parked outside a discount store and roamed the aisles aimlessly. I ended up buying a cheap disposable phone. I felt a bizarre urge to keep my old phone off, as if isolating myself from everyone would make the pain more bearable. Then I noticed a display of cheap utensils and household appliances. My eyes fell on a row of kettles. Without thinking, I grabbed another one, some flimsy, bottom-shelf brand. The clerk gave me an odd look as I paid, but I ignored it. I took the kettle back to the motel, placed it on the tiny stovetop in the kitchenette, and let it boil and boil until the water nearly vanished. Something about that hiss of steam comforted me, like I was listening to the slow exhalation of my own bitterness. Days rolled by. The tension in my chest sat like a stone. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by nightmarish visions of her body pressed to his. Sometimes I woke up gasping, convinced I was choking on my own regrets. I fell into a routine of half-living, go to work, come back, stew in my motel, pick up Ethan once in a while. My relationship with Rachel existed in curt texts about scheduling or finances. I knew we had to start divorce proceedings at some point, but the weight of it all made me stall. Then one afternoon, the principal from Ethan's school called me at work. "Mr. Lovell," she said, "there was a small incident. Ethan got into a fight with another boy. Can you come in?" My stomach sank. I dropped everything and drove there. The principal led me into her office. Ethan sat in a chair, a bruise on his cheek, tears dried on his face. I knelt in front of him, my heart twisting. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, "you okay?" He didn't answer. The principal explained that some kid teased Ethan about his parents splitting up. Ethan lashed out. I tried to swallow the guilt. "I'm sorry," I said to the principal. "I'll handle it." She gave me a sympathetic nod, clearly aware that we were going through a family crisis. After a short lecture about school rules, she let us go. I held my son's hand as we walked to the car. He looked so small, so broken. Once we were settled inside, I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "This is my fault," I said. "I know it hurts, but violence won't help." He glared at the floor. "That kid kept saying things about mom and some man," he muttered. "He said everyone knows." My chest constricted. The rumor mill was in full swing, apparently. Kids can be cruel, and parents gossip. Ethan felt cornered, so he fought back. I tried to muster some fatherly wisdom, but all I had was a searing sense of failure. That night, I decided we needed a moment of normalcy. I took him to a pizza place we both liked. He devoured slices while I nibbled on my own, forcing conversation about his favorite games. Eventually, I asked how he felt about everything honestly. He shrugged. "Mom said you might not come home again. Is that true?" My throat tightened. "I don't know," I admitted. "Things are complicated." He nodded in that heartbreakingly mature way some kids adopt when they sense they're on shaky ground. "But you still love me, right?" I reached across the table, clasping his hand. "Always, I promised." My heart ached, wishing I could shield him from the chaos I helped create. Dropping him back at Rachel's place that evening, I stayed in the car while he walked to the front door. She stood there, silhouette framed by the porch light. I saw the tension in her posture. It was the same tension knotted in my gut. Part of me wanted to stride up and say something, anything, to break the icy silence. Instead, I reversed out of the driveway. My head pounded with questions. Could we ever salvage a shred of what we once had? Did we even want to? One rainy Friday, I left work early. The gloom outside matched my mood. I had no plan, just a vague impulse to keep moving. I drove aimlessly until I found myself in front of Daniel's condo building. The one with the sleek lobby, the same building where I'd seen her barefoot months ago. I sat behind the wheel, gazing at that glass facade. My heart pounded. Something in me said, go in. Confront him again. Let him see what he's wrought. But I also knew it was pointless. He'd made his choices, and so had she. Confrontation wouldn't magically restore my family. Still, some magnetic pull drew me to the entrance. I parked, marched through the lobby, ignoring the quizzical looks of the security staff. I jabbed the elevator button for his floor. The entire ride up, I stared at my reflection in the polished steel doors, a tired, aging man with circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped. The elevator chimed. I stepped into the corridor, found his door, and knocked. My pulse throbbed in my ears. Daniel opened it wearing casual clothes, a sweater, and jeans. I smelled dinner cooking, some kind of pasta sauce. For a second, we just stood there in a standoff. Then, behind him, I saw Rachel appear, her hair tied back, barefoot again. My vision tunneled. She froze when she saw me, her lips parting in shock. "Michael," she began. My gaze dropped to her feet. There it was again, her bare toes on that same polished floor. A wave of nausea rolled through me. They looked like a domestic couple in the middle of a cozy evening while I was the intruder. Daniel cleared his throat. "Maybe you should come back another time," he said, trying to sound calm, but his voice wavered. Anger flashed in me. "I already lost my home," I snapped, "and apparently you've turned this place into a second one for her." Rachel looked like she wanted to vanish. "Don't do this," she whispered. But I couldn't stop. "Do what?" I barked. "Look at you, barefoot in his kitchen, cooking dinner like you're living some fantasy." Meanwhile, our son is confused and hurting, and I broke off, my throat tightening. She raised her chin defensively. I never wanted to hurt you, she said, the usual cliché. I laughed bitterly. Well, you did a bang-up job. Daniel stepped closer as if to intervene. Michael, this isn't just black and white, he said. Rachel and I shot him a glare so fierce that he shut up mid-sentence. You took something from me, I said, my voice low. Now I realize it was gone long before you came along, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. Rachel's eyes glistened. I'm sorry, she repeated, but the words rang hollow. Another wave of betrayal hit me. How dare she stand here, looking me in the eye while still standing in his domain. I wanted to tear the place apart. Instead, I inhaled, exhaled, tried to steel myself. I just wanted to see for myself, I said, how settled you were here. Now I know. With that, I spun on my heel and left. Neither of them followed. I heard no footsteps behind me, no final plea. I reached the elevator, hammered the button. My reflection in the metal was even worse than before, eyes red, face contorted with rage and sorrow. When the doors slid shut, I leaned my forehead against the cool steel. I wanted to die right there, disappear from the agony that had become my life. But I survived the ride down, 1 second at a time. Stepping into the night, I let the cold wind numb my face. In that moment, I realized something. I was done waiting for them to fix me, done hoping for some magical closure. I had only myself to rely on. For the next few weeks, my focus turned to forging a path forward. I saw a lawyer to discuss the property forms. I rented a small apartment closer to my job. It wasn't much, but at least it wasn't a motel. I brought Ethan over a few times, trying to keep his room cheerful, stocking it with his favorite posters and toys. We had quiet nights watching old movies from the 80s, something I loved doing as a kid. We'd order pizza and talk about random stuff. It helped stave off the darkness, but only just. One day, out of the blue, Rachel knocked on my apartment door. I hadn't expected to see her alone. She looked around the sparse living room, the mismatched couch, the bare walls, taking it all in. Nice place, she offered awkwardly. I shrugged. What do you want? She shifted uncomfortably. Ethan left his favorite hoodie here. But also, I wanted to talk. I gestured for her to come in. She perched on the edge of the couch. I stayed standing, arms crossed. I'm not here to rehash everything, she began, voice subdued. I need you to know I never planned for this. Dan was someone I knew through work, and then it just happened. I clenched my jaw. Great. That's very comforting, I muttered. She rubbed her eyes, exhaling shakily. I know nothing I say makes it okay. But Michael, I don't want us to hate each other. We have a son. We have a history. I stared at her, noticing the faint lines of stress on her face that hadn't been there a year ago. What do you expect from me? I asked, my voice raw. She picked at the couch cushion. I guess I'm hoping we can at least treat each other like people who once loved each other. A brittle laugh escaped me. Once, I echoed. She bowed her head. I do love you. It's just not in the way that. She stopped, tears gathering in her eyes. I turned away, unable to bear the pity. If that's all, you can go, I said. She rose, took a step toward me as if to offer some gesture of comfort, but then changed her mind. Take care of yourself, Michael, she whispered. For Ethan's sake, if nothing else. Then she left, the door clicking softly behind her. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. A swirling mess of anger, longing, and loss crowded my mind. I sank onto a chair, face in my hands. A voice inside me sneered that she still wanted me to be the stable one while she enjoyed her new life. Another part of me recognized she was in pain too, but I was too drained to care. Time slipped by. The days turned cooler. One Saturday evening, I found myself alone in my apartment. No calls from Ethan, no messages from work. Just a hollow silence. I stepped out onto the balcony, gazing at the city lights in the distance. My thoughts drifted to finality, to divorce papers, custody arrangements, the split of finances. I realized how quickly a decade of marriage can be dismantled once the cracks appear. I thought about fatherhood, about the vow I made when my son was born to never abandon him like my father abandoned me. I planned to keep that vow no matter what. But it still felt like I was failing him, letting him witness the collapse of our family. In a strange moment of clarity, I recalled the way the new kettle took 30 minutes to boil, how I'd sat and waited for all the water to evaporate. That was my heartbreak in a nutshell, waiting for a pot to boil only to find nothing left. So many years of devotion slowly simmered down to dryness. Perhaps that's all time does, wears us down until there's no moisture left for hope. I didn't plan it, but that night I started drafting a letter. I pulled out a notebook, scrawled words to Ethan, explaining I was sorry for everything that happened, that I never wanted him to feel unloved or neglected. I wrote about the times we laughed together, the Lego sets we built, the first baseball game I took him to. I told him my leaving the house had nothing to do with him, that he should never blame himself. I poured out every shred of love and regret I had in me. Then I tucked the pages away, feeling strangely lighter, though tears stained the ink in places. Eventually, the day came when I needed to finalize the divorce. The lawyer's office smelled of stale coffee and old leather chairs. Rachel was there, looking drained. We signed papers in front of a notary, the crisp shuffle of documents marking the official end of our union. My hands shook slightly as I wrote my name. She glanced at me, but I couldn't meet her eyes. When it was done, the lawyer gathered the papers and politely showed us out. We stepped into the corridor. There was a palpable weight in the air, like a funeral hush. We stood by the elevator, side by side, neither of us speaking. Finally, she said, "I'll drop Ethan off on Friday, okay?" I nodded. "Sure." The elevator arrived with a soft ding. We entered. The doors closed, sealing us in that small space. I stared at the floor numbers lighting up. She exhaled. I wish she began, then trailed off. I gave a hollow laugh. Yeah. Me too. The elevator doors slid open. We parted ways. I walked out of that building feeling almost numb. I expected heartbreak, maybe rage or despair. Instead, I felt a deep, cold emptiness, a vacuum where my marriage once existed. I climbed into my car, rested my head against the steering wheel. A single, shaking breath escaped me. Then I turned the ignition and drove away. I had no plan except to keep moving forward, because what else could I do? I found a strange peace in the days that followed. Maybe acceptance is the final stage of heartbreak. I realized that my father leaving me as a kid and now me leaving the marital home had become an eerie symmetry in my life. But I wasn't going to walk out on Ethan's future no matter what. If being the father who buys groceries was my role, so be it. I vowed to do it wholeheartedly. So I started picking him up more regularly, spending weekends together, showing up at his school events. Rachel and I communicated minimally, focusing on schedules, never treading into personal territory. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was waiting outside the school in my car when Ethan came running, backpack bouncing against his shoulders. He hopped in the front seat, excitedly telling me about a science project. I felt a surge of warmth, grateful for a moment of normalcy. We drove to a small diner for milkshakes. He told me about how he and a friend built a model volcano. I listened, letting his enthusiasm wash over me. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Is Mom happy with Dan?" My stomach did a slow, painful flip. I set down my milkshake, choosing my words carefully. "I don't really know," I admitted. "We're not close anymore." He nodded solemnly, stirring his drink. "He's nice to me," Ethan said. "But I miss you being around." I reached over and squeezed his shoulder gently. "Me too, buddy. But I'm here now and I'll always be here for you." He looked up at me, and for the first time since all this began, I saw a glimmer of relief in his eyes. "Okay," he whispered. I tried to smile, though my heart twisted. I realized that no matter how broken things were between me and Rachel, being Ethan's dad was an unbreakable bond. I'd carry that responsibility, that love, until my final breath. I wish I could say everything magically improved after that day. It didn't. The shadows lingered. Sometimes late at night, I woke from dreams of seeing them together, the hushed intimacy of that condo. But the nightmares lessened, replaced by a quieter sadness. I told myself time would heal me, but I discovered a darker truth. Time doesn't heal, it erases. Slowly, it rubbed away the intense pain, the raw edges, leaving a dull ache in place of the once sharp anguish. Memories grew hazy, especially the good ones. I found myself struggling to recall the sound of her laughter when we were happy. The betrayal overshadowed it all. My final act of closure came on an ordinary Tuesday. I'd left work early, feeling restless. I drove to that cheap motel where I'd first holed up after leaving home. I parked in the same spot. The neon signs still buzzed overhead. A strange urge told me to go inside, maybe check if the same room was available. But I didn't. I stood by my car, gazing at the flickering letters, and thought about how far I'd come since the night I arrived here, numb with disbelief. Months had passed. I was divorced, living on my own, co-parenting a boy who desperately needed stability. I felt both older and emptier. A small voice inside me whispered that I should let go of this place, let go of the ghosts. So I turned away, walked back to the driver's seat, and pulled onto the highway. That evening, I finally grabbed the letter I'd written to Ethan and slipped it into an envelope. I planned to give it to him someday, maybe when he was older. Perhaps it would explain the choices I made. Or maybe it'd just be a relic of a man who once drowned in sorrow. Either way, I sealed it and put it in a drawer, letting out a long breath. My reflection in the window showed a tired face, but also a flicker of resolve. If I couldn't change the past, at least I could anchor myself in the present. I had work to do, a child to raise, and a life that wouldn't pause for me to wallow forever. One final time I confronted Daniel. Not by choice, but by chance. I ran into him in a grocery store aisle. It was almost laughable, the two men in Rachel's life standing in front of a display of canned tomatoes. At first, neither of us spoke. I saw wariness in his eyes, bracing for a confrontation. But all I did was stare at him, letting a wave of bitter memories wash over me. Then I turned to walk away. He called after me, "Michael, wait." I stopped, refusing to face him. "What?" I said, voice clipped. He cleared his throat. "I just wanted to say, I never meant for anyone to get hurt." The anger rose in me like bile, but I forced it down. "Well," I replied, "that's comforting. Congratulations on accomplishing the exact opposite." He let out a weary exhale. "Look, I don't expect you to forgive me. For Rachel's sake, and Ethan's, I hope we can." I spun around, my glare pinning him. "Don't talk about my son," I snapped. "He's mine. You had no right to barge into his life, make him think you're some superhero." He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "I'm done here." With that, I turned and strode away, letting the hum of fluorescent lights swallow my footsteps. I left the store, my heart pounding. That was the last time I saw Daniel face to face. Whatever arrangement he and Rachel had, it no longer concerned me. My only priority was forging a path with Ethan, trying to salvage the shards of fatherhood that remained. People sometimes ask if there was a moment I truly felt free of her betrayal, free of the pain. The answer is complicated. Maybe I never fully let go. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I remember those bare feet on that polished floor and a longing stings me like a phantom limb. But I press on because life doesn't stop for heartbreak. Months roll into years. I watch Ethan grow, watch him adapt, watch him slowly accept that his parents live apart. Occasionally, I catch him glancing at me with the same question in his eyes: how did we get here? And I can only offer a sad smile. Because we got here through 100 small mistakes and one colossal betrayal. No single apology can fix it. But life goes on, unstoppable. I find small pleasures: morning coffee on my balcony, weekend road trips with Ethan. The rage fades, replaced by a quiet resolution. I focus on my work, building designs for new projects, immersing myself in the satisfaction of creating something tangible. I start to hope, in some distant corner of my mind, that maybe one day I'll meet someone who appreciates me before it's too late. Then I dismiss the thought, not ready for that leap. Let it come or not, I tell myself. The scars remain, a testament to what I survived. Sometimes I dream about the day I found my father leaving. In that dream, I'm a boy again, standing in the doorway begging him to stay. He never looks back. I always jolt awake, covered in cold sweat. Then I realize I've become the man who walked away too, though in a different context. The difference is I still show up for Ethan. I'll never vanish without a trace. That's the promise I hold onto. The rest is just the slow erosion of memory. And so, if you ask me how it ends, well, it ends like this. I come home from work to my small apartment. I unlock the door, flick on a lamp, drop my keys on the counter. I stare at the kettle on the stove, a faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. I fill it with water, set it to heat, and wait. The hiss starts quietly. I open the cupboard, take out a single mug, and place a tea bag inside. The kettle rumbles and sighs, building toward a boil. Eventually, steam pours from the spout. I switch off the burner. I pour the water, watch it swirl around the tea. I stand there, alone in the half-lit kitchen, inhaling the warm scent. It's just me, this modest routine, and the realization that I've survived the worst. I sip the tea, letting the heat flow through me, reminding myself that tomorrow is another day, another chance to keep going, even when it hurts, because sometimes that's all a man can do. Time hasn't healed me. It's just erased the edges, leaving a ragged silhouette of who I used to be. But that silhouette is enough. For now, it has to be enough. I finish my tea, pour out the dregs, and flick off the light. The night outside is silent. I close my eyes, feeling the weight of everything and nothing. My heart is still beating, and that's all that matters in this cold, quiet world. Tomorrow, I'll see Ethan. Tomorrow, I'll keep living. And that, I guess, is how I find a shred of meaning in this mess, by moving forward, step by step, into whatever lies beyond.